everybody. I'm Cole Chase, author of Cold Hit and the Shadowfast Thriller series.
And I'm Bob Rapoza. I'm the author of the Nick Randall Archeological Adventure series.
Pat Weill here, author of the Park and Walker Action Thriller series, and this is the first one.
And we are here as three thriller authors who think it's actually pretty fun to think and talk about thrillers. And if that sounds like a fun hang to you, join us because today we're marking the 28th anniversary of the release of The Killing Floor, Lee Child's novel that unleashed Jack Reacher upon an unsuspecting world. Pat, why should we study Jack Reacher?
I was looking up who is the best thriller author, and this was back in like 2002 or something. I just put on the internet, like best thriller writer, and it came up with Lee Child. And so he's one of the most successful writers to date. This Jack Reacher series has sold over 100 million copies. Then there was 2 movies produced by and starring Tom Cruise. And now there's a really popular Reacher show on Amazon. Season 3 just came out and it set a record for most views in the first week.
Okay, so Jack Reacher, hugely influential in the thriller world. But there still might be someone out there who's unfamiliar with The Killing Floor in particular, since it came out in 1997. So, Bob, can you summarize for us the premise and what The Killing Floor is all about?
The Reacher character is someone who grew up as an army brat, moving around town to town because his dad was in the service. And then he joined the military and became a military cop, an MP. And because of that, he always lived this ultra-rigid lifestyle. And then this book takes place 6 months after he left the military, and he's basically traveling the country by bus and just checking out America and kind of experience it. And unfortunately, he ends up stumbling into a murder scene and ends up being one of the primary suspects initially in the book. And so basically the rest of the story is how he goes from being a suspect to helping them solve the crime and getting through the entire situation.
Wow, that is a great little summary. Thank you.
Great, thanks.
You read it? What stood out to you?
I thought it started off a little choppy, this being Lee Child's first book. The first few pages were really short sentences, sentence fragments as well, so you could kind of feel like Child was getting his feel for it. But then, of course, it just took off, and he did a great job of world building, character development, plot twists that you didn't see coming, and I was just super impressed by the end of the book with Lee Child's writing ability. And now I understand why he sold over 100 million books, as Pat pointed out earlier, and why he's one of the best in the business.
I actually wound up counting all the sentences in the first chapter, of which there are 217, and 57 of them were sentence fragments. So almost a quarter of that first chapter are sentence fragments. And then moreover, the sentences that are there average 5 or 6 words long. So it gives a very stripped down feel, maybe a little self-conscious. I understand he wrote the first draft in pencil and paper, but boy, is he a fast learner, because you can see it getting better as he goes.
I saw the police cruisers pull into the gravel lot. They were moving fast and crunched to a stop, light bars flashing and popping. Red and blue light in the raindrops on my window. Doors burst open. Policemen jumped out, 2 from each car, weapons ready. 2 revolvers, 2 shotguns. This was heavy stuff.
There were no real big words or anything besides being choppy. He kept everything really simple at first. I don't know why he did that. Maybe kind of just to hook the reader a little bit. I'm not a fancy person. This guy's from Birmingham, which is a working class town, famous for, like serious people about their work, not fancy people. And then, he starts using like real literary style, bigger words at about the 20% mark.
I'm wondering if some of that shortness is because he had a television background, because it's closer to what an on-air script might look like than literature. I don't know. Pat, you had a really interesting insight. As we said, he just gets better and better as the thing goes. And you mentioned you notice there are parts that are happening very fast in the story. He writes the fast parts slowly. Can you explain that?
I'm a Lee Child super fan, so I've read all of his biographies and all his books and all his essays and all his short stories, and I've seen all the YouTube and whatever. And so I know that Lee Child says that you should write the fast parts slow and the slow parts fast, right? So what this means is that in these scary situations, in like fights or, car crashes or anything like that, when someone's adrenaline takes over and their mind is, whirring at 1 billion miles an hour, everything seems like it's in slow motion, and that's what he writes. But the point is, he just takes it really slow, like.
I saw it happen in that terrible slow motion you get when your mind is racing faster than you can move. My gun hand was drifting left to track Kleiner on his way back to his own weapon, but Kleiner dived to the right. He launched himself in a desperate leap down the mountainside to the spot where Teal had dropped his shotgun. He wasn't going back for his own gun. He was going to use Teal's weapon. He was going to use the same lethal geometry that Teal would have used. I saw my hand reverse its direction. It was cutting a graceful, smooth arc through the air just behind Kleiner, tumbling and sliding down in a great spray of dollars. Then I heard the crash of the staff door bursting open below.
Yeah, it's fantastic when you read it. I know for me, I don't have the life of beating up evildoers wherever I go yet. But I have been in car accidents, especially when I moved to the Pacific Northwest and encountered ice driving for the first time. The driver behind me encountered black ice, spun out, nudged my car spinning on the ice. And what Lee Child writes is what my experience was like. Your brain revs up, and there's 1,000 super fast impressions, but they're coming in very vivid, and they stick in your memory later on. And one of the scenes you pointed out to me, again, I just got curious. He spends over 350 words to recount something that probably takes about 3/4 of a second. To me, it happens the way true stress situations happen in life. So it's something I really admire. And will steal.
And here's how you know it's good. It's not boring. You're sitting there reading those sections of the book and you're going like, this is all important stuff that you need to have. Like you mentioned, Cole, the point with swinging the gun up, and then there's those victims that are in the way of the shotgun blast, right, Pat? And it's like, well, yeah, that's an interesting part of the story that I want to know as a reader. So you're glad that he goes into that process and explains it so thoroughly.
Reacher has this deep, deep loyalty. He's not part of any agency. He's not going to get rewarded for taking on the bad guy, risking his life, and yet he feels obligated to do it. You had some insights on where that loyalty may have come from. Could you share those with us?
Lee Child, or Jim Grant, is his real name, hates bullies, right? When he was a kid, and all these books are based on his experiences fighting. Like one of the things that Lee Child is famous for is his fight scenes, is the realism and the confidence that Reacher displays in any kind of confrontation. And so he says that he took that from his experiences when he was about 9 years old, because he was a huge 9-year-old. And in fact, he kind of had an informal occupation of being an anti-bully guy. Like his fellow students would give him their cookies or some of their lunch money to protect them. And so that's where this loyalty or this sense of confidence and these fight scenes come from.
Robert McKee is an advisor in Hollywood on how stories work. He's extremely famous in the writing community. He has a book called Action, and in that book he says that in action thrillers, the characters are not meant to be real, they're actually metaphors. So if we stipulate that point for a minute, what metaphor do you think Jack Reacher is supposed to represent?
Avenging angel, maybe the metaphor that I think as human beings, we don't like bullies, like Pat was saying was the case for Lee Child. And I think that we all want to be the person that stands up for the little guy in the face of danger against the bigger bully. And I think that's a bit of what Reacher is representing in his books.
Many times in life, we feel a clear sense of what's right and wrong in a situation, but we feel like we can't do anything about it, either because we're not 6'4" and trained to fight soldiers like Jack Reacher, or just the process. And I'm not against due process, but we live in a society with a ton of litigious people and laws and regulations, and Reacher tends to just cut through all that and handle things. It's pretty marvelous fantasy to me.
Yeah, I agree.
Me too.
Reacher seems very human in the killing floor, but if I go forward to how the series progresses, there are times when he's kind of a bully. He certainly lacks empathy in some certain situations. He's got this incredible focus. And I'm leading up to the question, do we think Jack Reacher is autistic?
Yes, I think Jack Reacher and Lee Child and most authors are on the autism scale, right? It's a spectrum, right? Just like a lot of other things, so you could be a little bit autistic and you could be totally disabled, And yeah, I think Jack Reacher is kind of a savant. Some of the things he does in his later books, and even in this one too, a little bit, he goes on these like thought rants, he'll be doing math in his head, he could talk about history, and he's just a super analytical guy. And I think that's true of Lee Child, and that's true of me, and probably of you guys too. Just want to clarify, it's not just about being analytical. Being on the autism spectrum means needing quiet, super analytical, but also kind of antisocial a little bit.
I'm glad you pointed that out, his trains of thought, because in this book and in all the others, kind of his superpower is this deductive reasoning he does, where maybe they're hunting for someone who's hiding, and in theory they could be anywhere in the United States, and he will sit down alone in his hotel room and start thinking through, okay, what does a frightened person of his wealth and class and outlook do, which he has experience with because he was an MP. And basically his logic is more deductive and more accurate than Sherlock Holmes many times. But most of the time I kind of buy it. The reasoning is well considered. Agree? Disagree?
Yeah, I agree with you, Cole. I think what happens here is Lee Child kind of takes it to probably the fullest extent he could without getting too far out there in space. But when you think about Reacher's background, this is a guy was trained and worked in a field where he was dealing with other trained men and trying to understand what their thought process is, what's the human tendency to do things. And that at least provides some kind of cover for Lee Child to create the Reacher character and his ability to deduce. And public safety was one of the areas I worked in over my career. And I worked with a lot of police officers, and I have some in my family too. And you see that after you deal with certain situations on a repetitive basis, you kind of fall into a line of thinking like that, where you're figuring out, if X happens, this is what person's going to do in response to it, and here are our possibilities. And you really start seeing that people generally respond to situations in a really similar fashion. So it's just enough where I'll say, like, okay, yeah, I'll buy it. Hey, it's a book, it's a story.
Yeah, it is fiction. But I like what you're saying, because in a sense, what I'm calling a superpower of deduction could just be kind of pattern recognition from a very experienced manhunter.
Yeah.
What did you think, for example, of Reacher? He becomes very friendly with a police woman named Roscoe, who's part of the local constabulary. Did that work for you? What do you want to think?
It did. It worked for me. I read these books a long time ago, except for Killing Floor, which all three of us just read. And my recollection of these stories is that Reacher is just this killing machine, a super deductor like Sherlock Holmes and a kind of a loner. But there wasn't I don't remember a lot of romance. I mean, I remember him like connecting with women in a lot of books and having a one night stand or this, you know, this little partnership, but not like this book. This book was a real romance. Like there was a lot more romance than I remembered, and it worked. And I really liked that relationship.
Child did a nice job laying it out, the way it started, the way it progressed, and it made sense. It seemed organic, I guess you'd say.
Yeah, I was taking notes on that too because I don't have a lot of experience writing romance, and the way he initiated it was basically just eye contact when he was in a jail cell and she was bringing him a cup of coffee or something like that.
Yeah.
It felt like the way these connections can occur. So again, for first book, this guy is a fast learner and very skilled. What were some other characters that stood out to you? I'll mention one that I thought was an exception because I thought he was kind of crappy, and that's the mayor of Margrave, who was basically Boss Hogg from Dukes of Hazzard. He didn't seem very real to me, but many of the other characters did seem real. Or were there others that you liked?
Yeah, well, I liked the use of the two barbers. So there's two black barbers that play a kind of a critical role, and it seemed like Lee Child used that as kind of a literary tool to kind of move the story along, and it also used it to characterize a person who's not in the story except in memory because he's dead, and also to characterize Jack Reacher. So those two black barbers I thought were wonderfully drawn characters that end up playing a critical role that I didn't see coming, quite honestly.
I liked Finlay and Hubble. Finlay is one of the three main protagonists with Reacher, and then Roscoe, the lady we just talked about, and then Finlay is another main character, and I really liked him and his relationship with Reacher.
That's a great point. I really liked Finley also. He is a black detective who has served a whole career in Boston. And after divorce and some other life events, he has transferred to this hick town in Georgia so that he can continue working, but with a lot less pressure. He's basically way overqualified for the position that he has. I thought they did an excellent job of handling how suspicious he was of Reacher and how carefully he checked Reacher's credibility. And then once he began to believe in Reacher's abilities and his good intentions, the way they became partners, that was all great work to me.
Yeah, Pat, you mentioned Finlay, and to an earlier point about how this Jack Reacher in this book is a little bit more human. There's a scene where they figure something out important, and Reacher goes and high fives Finlay. I don't think you get a lot of that in the later Reacher books.
Yeah, I agree, Bob. This is a really heartfelt book, and I think it's the real Lee Child. And then later, as he got richer and more successful, I bet these plots get a little bit more commercial and stuff. But I think this was a genuine article.
Yeah, that's well said. And Bob, you pointed out, and maybe you want to expound on this. He has an encounter with a couple of kind of outside hitmen that the bad people in town bring in to dispense of folks who are getting too nosy. I can't remember if they're Cuban, they're Latino of some kind, and they confront Reacher on an isolated highway where they've got knives and stuff. He's got nothing. And talk a little about the aftermath of that confrontation, Bob.
As in Reacher, true Reacher style, he puts those guys down, good night, guys. And then, but afterwards, just like all of us would be, it's the adrenaline running through him. He's got to calm himself. He's on the verge of a panic attack. And that's the way Child describes it. And he basically has to get his emotions under control so he can drive the car and finish the job that he set out to do that day, Cole. So yeah, that was another good example of this Reacher actually being human.
I forgot that the whole killing floor is in first person from the view of Reacher, because most of the later Reacher books are in third person. And I don't think we get inside him. I like the scene you're describing, Bob. You're in his body. You're feeling the shortness of breath and that adrenaline tingle and all that. It's so vivid and relatable. It's powerful work.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
I agree.
It's always a tightrope to walk for thriller authors because we want extraordinary things to happen that are exciting and stimulate your mind, and but at the same time they have to bear some relationship to what could actually happen. So a lot of the book struck me as plausible, but I want to target one thing that I found deeply implausible, and that's that in theory Reacher is randomly going across the country by bus. He gets off in Margrave, Georgia, because he recalls that there's an old blues singer that he likes who lived there or was there a lot or something. So he gets off just to see if he can follow up this history. Then, pretty deep in the book, probably a third of the way through, he discovers he has this big personal connection to the murder that happened. I just found that I liked the technique of giving him a personal reason to solve this mystery, but the coincidence of it was just one step too far for me. Am I alone in that assessment?
You are probably not alone. But I would like to point out that he does go to Margrave. He gets off the bus, not only because of the blues singer that he wants to find out more about, but also because his brother had made a comment to him that his brother had stopped in Margrave recently. And so he had also stood out on the map to him for that reason.
Yeah, okay, that helps.
Yeah, yeah. Again, I think as authors, we, I think we employ like literary ideas and techniques that sometimes might stretch, the plausibility. To your point, Cole, it seems a little wow that, and then his brother plays another major role in the story that you go kind of like, huh, interesting. So, but as Pat pointed out, I think there's at least, I think Child writes in, throws us a couple of bones to make it seem a little bit more plausible. And once you get into the story, it's so well written that you'll say, I'm gonna follow this and go with it.
Yeah, there's so much momentum, you kind of don't have time to think about, would that really happen? You're more like, what's going to happen next? I don't think it's too big a spoiler to reveal that later in the book you realize that what's motivating a lot of this bad action is trying to cover up uh, counterfeit money. And the question soon becomes, how does a counterfeiter get the special paper that US currency is printed on in order to be able to do it at scale and fool everybody that these are real dollar bills? The answer to that is perplexing through a lot of the book, and the solution I thought was tremendously clever and feasible.
Yeah, it's a very well plotted book, and this was back in 1996. He was writing it when it was harder to do this kind of research. Now you can just have Chat GPT tell you all about how that might be done, but not then. So I agree, Cole. I applaud the plotting and the planning and the research that went into this one.
Again, when I'm reading it, I started getting worried. Like, oh, how is he going to solve this problem? You start thinking of it too, how you're going to write it, and you're saying like, well, he's going to write himself into a corner. And the solution is so creative and yet so simple. And then to you mentioned Pat, one of the other characters in there, Hubble, and the role that Hubble plays. It makes perfect sense. So again, such a fantastic idea that I could see an author wanting to write a story just to kind of get that information out there, and I thought it was fantastic.
Yeah. Let's just hear your personal opinions. You read this whole book. Did it leave you wanting more Reacher? Did you feel like you learned something as a writer? Did you have fun? What are your reflections?
Yes. All the above. Great story, a lot of fun. Learned a lot of writing techniques here. Love the way that we learned about Reacher's background without having an information dump, right? He's
Oh, yeah.
literally being interrogated for a crime. So you find out where he's from, what he used to do for a living, about his family, all this stuff. And it's in the course of a conversation with Finley, that detective that you guys talked about earlier. So I learned a lot, and I think, Pat, you both commented about this, writing action scenes and how quickly they're over. The majority of the action scene is the thought process of, here's what I'm going to do, here's the planning, here's what I'm seeing, here's how I'm going to respond. And it's not these 20-minute drawn out fight scenes that are unrealistic. Just so well done, in my opinion.
Oh yeah. And I would also say yes to all of the above, and I would love to read more Reacher. I've already read them all up until Andrew Child. That's a whole different topic we didn't get into today. But yeah, I would love to go back. When I read these books, I was not an author, and so now that I'm reading it as an author, I'm really fascinated to see the evolution of Child's writing style. We saw it evolve here in this book, and I know we'd see it evolve between the books too.
All right, guys, thanks for your insights. Now, if you've watched this far, you probably have opinions about Reacher too, or you wouldn't have stayed tuned. We'd love to hear them in the comments. Let us know what you think. Let us know if we should do this again and who we should investigate. On behalf of all three thriller authors, some kind of ending. I haven't scripted yet.